teleported. Huh?
Maybe it's time you laid off the Pokéblock.
The math was wrong. Oops! What's up, guys? Appreciate all the support on the last vid. Love ya. I thought I'd just give a brief addendum to the last video before branching out into more topics, because yes, shockingly, there is somehow more. Look, I like to cut these videos down to the bare minimum, which means there are a lot of pieces to pick up on the cutting room floor. Let's just get into it. For starters, let's do some simple stuff left off in the last one. I never mentioned the Oras Safari Zone. That's because Oras completely removed the Safari game. The Safari Zone is still there, and has been expanded upon, actually. It's still there, you go there, you catch all the Pokemon that you could catch in the originals, but it's just a normal area now where you catch Pokemon and find items. Thus, it's completely irrelevant to the Pokéblock video, but I probably should have said so. I'd also like to say shoutouts to DeGrub97 for fulfilling the prophecy started with the first video. Remember, these videos literally exist because every time someone talks about complicated stuff in the series, someone will undoubtedly chime in with, "Oh, but the Azure Flute was too complicated." Yeah. Honestly, a glorious moment. Also, yes, I'd mixed up the math in my 5-step flavor example. Ultimately, it is irrelevant, as the formula remains the same, but that one still slipped through the cracks. It's a shame because I caught a lot of mistakes during the editing process and the scripting process and the recording process. Though I will say that some mistakes were, maybe a bit less subtle than others. You see, bait has been replaced with Pokéblocks so that the entire system can revolve around natures now. So let's first talk about how the catch and escape factor. Huh? So let's first talk about the how catch and escape factors. Oh no! I had a stroke while I was writing the script. Well, I guess the only thing I've missed is saying what Pokéblocks actually are, and I didn't even realize it until I read this comment. Pokéblocks are basically a split between classic pet food, which comes in a number of shapes, including cubes, and Pez dispensers, which are loaded up the same way. There are even official Pokémon Pez dispensers. As for what's up with the Sheen stat and how feeding your Pokemon has an impact in contests, it is commonly known that animal diets have a huge impact on their coats, and the look of their fur can signify their health. For example, if you've got a cat who gets to eat a lot of wet food and meat, they're likely to have a shinier coat, and even the original Japanese games refer to this stat as fur sheen. Diet is often a huge aspect for show dogs, who will indeed be judged on the sheen of their fur. Of course, my criticism is primarily from the idea that you're supposed to know sheen is specifically how much you can eat, even though contests do indeed use your sheen stat in the judging process. So it's a weird split between, yes, it makes sense, no, it doesn't make any sense. Once again, I find it all a bit strangely obtuse, but I understand the logic to an extent. Either way, let's get to it. We've dug deeper, so now let's take a look at those Pokéblock adjacents. Lots of you have said it, joking or not. Poffins. Yes, this time we actually get to talk about Poffins, and I think you'll be surprised at this section, especially after how I talked about it last video. First off, to make them, instead of a Pokéblock case, you need a Puffin Case. Look, I get a case for candy, but Poffins are like bread, so... I don't know, fuck it. Throw this one on the spear pillar background. Poffins. Oh, right. If you were curious, this background is just the scene towards the end of Pokemon Platinum where the Lake Trio head for Spear Pillar. That's all this is. Anyway, to get a Puffin Case, you head to the Puffin house in Sinnoh, and immediately go down a few doors to the Pokemon fan club, because that's where the Puffin Case actually is. This one's weird. It feels like it's meant to be a callback to the bike voucher from the Kanto games, but that was multiple towns over, and served as a way to tease the bike earlier than you'd actually get it, and then you have to backtrack and actually get the bike. This one just seems, maybe a bit like busy work. Part of me imagined there's at least a few players who had a genuine interest in this part of the game, went to the Puffin house, were sent away, said, okay, I guess I'll figure that out later, and then never came back. For those who did come back and got the opportunity to make Puffins, it goes as follows. You pick a berry, you play a minigame, and the game spits out some unexplained numbers and puts a Puffin in your inventory. I imagine that sounds pretty familiar. Especially when you look at the footage and see exactly what the numbers are. Let's break this one down, and we'll approach it from that place of already knowing how Pokéblocks work. Puffins have levels, smoothness, flavors, and descriptors. Right away, level is exactly the same. It tells us the strength of the strongest flavor in the Puffin. All 5 flavors are the same. If you're worried about these vague dots, the bottom screen tells us what they are. Smoothness is actually removing a layer of obfuscation that I complained about back in Gen 3. Now, berry smoothness just directly translates to Puffin smoothness, and there's no more feel. It is still the same thing, and sheen is still in this game, as was mentioned last video. In place of colors now, we have descriptors. This is another layer of obfuscation being removed. Rather than trying to remember that olive means whatever olive was, the game will just say, this is a spicy dry Puffin. I'm very appreciative of that. But, just as Pokéblocks had a bunch of bonus colors, Puffins have a bunch of bonus descriptors. All of the colors from Gen 3 are back, but Puffins are not referred to with their colors in this game. It's just as well. It's not like you're necessarily getting more or less information, whether the game gives you a chartreuse Pokéblock or an effervescent Puffin. First off, yet again, you will be punished if you use 2 of the same berry, and it will make a black Puffin, now known as a foul Puffin. You'll also make one if your Puffin contains 0 flavors otherwise. This is also the case for Pokéblocks that I didn't mention in the last video. 0 flavors equals a black Pokéblock. Same with Puffins. And no matter how you make a black Pokéblock, it will just churn out 3 random flavors with a strength of 2. If you've made a Puffin that has 3 flavors, naturally, you'll make a gray one known as a rich Puffin. And if you've got 4 flavors, you'll make a white one known as an overripe Puffin. And yes, gold is back as well, though now it applies to level 50 and up, as opposed to needing to be above level 50. These are known as mild Puffins. I don't know, a bit of a strange name to me. But hey, the system still works. Now let's look at those Puffin stats a little closer. Smoothness is calculated by taking the average smoothness of the berries used and subtracting the number of berries. So yes, that's exactly the same. Biggest differences here are that the smoothness stats have all been greatly reduced, as you might recall, and for the system as a whole, Puffins can now be made alone with a single berry. The highest berry smoothness stat in this game is 60, so you cannot make a Puffin with more than 59 smoothness. We just did that at random in the last video. Now, the flavors are calculated by adding up all the berries' flavor stats, subtracting the weakening values, and subtracting the number of negatives. Although now, instead of just setting the negatives to 0, there's a maximum too. All values are clamped to be between 0 and 99. This is a strange thing. I should tell you now, Pokéblocks do not do that. In fact, between this video and the last, I spent some extra time making more Pokéblocks. Look at this one. That's way stronger than any Puffin you're literally allowed to make. But everything I just told you is the bare minimum, with no bonuses applied. That's because all the differences between Puffins or Pokéblocks are contained solely within the fact that the 2 are made with different minigames. Remember that the results of the Berry Blender played a factor in Pokéblocks, but there's no more Berry Blender. Instead of making candy with a big machine, you're making a type of bread in a pot. So, Poffins are made by you being brought to a pot of already made batter, being asked to add a berry to it, and then cooking with that batter. As soon as you start cooking, the game asks you to stir. Without enough agitation, the batter will burn. So your goal is to stir this pot as fast as possible, but go too fast and you'll spill the batter. By default, this process lasts 60 seconds, but correctly stirring the mixture will lower the time needed to complete the Poffin. Because you're cooking batter to eventually create a kind of bread or other baked good, the mixture will firm up over time. As such, you need to stir faster as it goes, but spilling becomes harder. You can tell where you are in the process by looking at the flames. Once the flames turn blue, you're in the final stage, where the Poffin has solidified to such an extent that there is no batter to spill, no matter how fast you stir, so lay into it. I should mention that if you stir in the wrong direction, you'll still prevent burning, but the game will not reduce the cooking time for you. Once time is up, the game says done and appraises all those things we mentioned, but now we get to fill in those formulas from earlier. There are two things to keep in mind: the amount of time we took, and how many times we spilled and burned the batter. We're gonna lightning round the flavor formula since we already know it. So, add all the berries flavors together, subtract the weakening flavors, subtract 1 for all the negatives, and then, I believe what the game does is multiply everything by 60, and then divide by the number of seconds you took. However, if you want this a little closer to Gen 3's formula, you can make a multiplier by taking 60 and dividing by how much time you took, and then multiplying everything by that number. Mathematically, they work out to be the same thing. Next, subtract 1 from every flavor for each spill and each burn that occurred during the cooking. Yes, that's right. Unlike the berry blender, whose results only serve to enhance a block, Poffin cooking can produce a negative effect if you play poorly. Well, now's where you round all the numbers to the nearest integer and clamp the values between 0 and 99. I should mention that the game's recorded cooking time uses hundredths of a second, but the accuracy is down to the frame, specifically 30ths of a second in this instance. When you feed a Pokemon a Poffin, the flavor preferences work out exactly the same. They even have the same reactions from Gen 3. If there's more of the Pokemon's liked flavor than the disliked, they eat it happily, and if the opposite is true, they eat it disdainfully. What is different this time is that the 10% modifier mentioned last time is now applied to the entire Poffin whenever one of these situations occurs. It definitely complicates the process a little more. I'll also mention that the sheen meter is now a little more logical. Now, you start with 0 stars, and the meter maxes out at 12 stars. I'll show the thresholds for every star here, but just know you get 1 for just about every 21 points in sheen. 21 times 12 is 252, so it's pretty close. I just have to point out one thing. Because 21 times 12 is 252, that means 3 of the stars need a range of 22 points, since that'll put us over by 3 points, and the stars will add up to 255. But they didn't do that. Stars 0, 3, 6, and 9 all have ranges of 22. Which means they had to compensate again by giving star 11 a range of 20. I tried to make sense of this, thinking, oh okay, maybe they just did 255 divided by 12, and they just used that number for each cutoff, and then rounded it all out, and this is how it turned out. 255 divided by 12 equals 21.25, and no matter how I add this together, no matter how I round, no matter which number I look at, look, I imagine it's just that someone just had to pick some ranges, and this is a very minor detail, but I thought you guys like hearing weird things that exist in these games, so I figured I'd put it in. Well, outside of that, I'll talk about the multiplayer aspects. Once again, it's the same, everyone brings a berry and then they play the minigame at the same time, but there are 3 things to mention. First, there are no NPCs you can do this with. What I'm about to talk about is exclusive to playing with multiple people. Second is the new synchronization bonus. If all the players involved synchronize their movements and stir their batter at the same time and the same speed, you'll get a sparkly trail that leads to a better time reduction, allowing for a better multiplier, and, depending on how much synchronization you get, you'll get a special bonus value ranging from 1 to 10. What gets done with this value? this value just gets straight up subtracted from the Puffin's smoothness. Now yes, this is a big deal, but it's slightly mitigated by how difficult and inconsistent it is to pull off. But what's worse is that the lowest smoothness berries in this game have 20 smoothness. Meaning that using 4 of them will bring you down to 16, and then getting the max sync bonus will bring you down to 6. This is a great stat, but it means you won't be grinding out anything crazy and quirky like the nut pea blocks from the last vid. But at least there are 15 berries to pick from here, so you can just make actual Puffins with 6 smoothness. But the best aspect here is that when you cook together, you get multiple Puffins, one for every player who participated. 4 players get together, each of them gets 4 Puffins. If you're really crazy, you could get a group of 4 players together, feed all 4 of the Puffins you got to one of your Pokemon, and then trade that Pokemon to your friends, so it can eat all 16 of the Puffins that were made. Outside of that, there's a special level 60 mild Puffin that you can receive at the Super Contest Hall. It's got 40 points in every stat, making it one of a kind. And in Pokemon Platinum, you can buy level 32 2-flavor Puffins with 20 smoothness at the Veilstone department store. And I think that's it for Puffins. They're not used for anything else in the game, the way Pokéblocks have the Safari Zone. What else is there to say? They're in Pokemon Go? Oh, we're doing this again? Okay, let's just get it out of the way. So, unlike the Oras section in the last vid, BDSP is, we'll call it a faithful remake. How about that? In fact, this one's going to be complicated, because there's just so little interest in this game. There are certain things I can't talk about in a lot of depth, because no one's got the interest required. There's no research to be done out there. Well, that said, being a faithful remake and all, while Oras may have gotten rid of the Sheen stat, BDSP brought it back. Bear in mind that Sheen was never actually stricken from the Pokemon data structure, so if you filled up on Pokéblocks in Gen 3, you could transfer that Mon to Gen 4, be forbidden from feeding Puffins, transfer them to 5 and then 6, feed it all the Oras blocks in the world, and then transfer it up again to Brilliant Diamond, and suddenly be barred from Puffins again. Or there's the much worse scenario of someone having transferred straight to BDSP and only learning now that they completely missed their opportunity to take advantage of Oras, seeing as how Pokemon transfers only go in one direction. Well, at any rate, let's talk about the very minor changes. First and foremost, the 0 to 99 range has been changed. Now, the range is 0 to 100. Second, there's a new kind of Puffin in this game. If you hit level 95 without a single burn or spill, you make a super mild Puffin. Look, it's rainbow. The rainbow aspect is entirely irrelevant. It doesn't possess any special all stats up property like Oras. It's just the color they chose. Oh, and also multiplayer was completely removed. Alright, the next game! Okay, look, we gotta talk about it. The multiplayer aspect was removed from Puffins, despite it theoretically being easier than ever to do. And with the Underground, multiplayer was really pushed for this game, but it's just not included. As such, some new stuff had to be implemented. First off, you can simply select up to 4 berries on your own, since you're always cooking alone. Selecting multiple berries still grants you multiple Puffins, but sadly, a lack of friends means you really are just getting 4 Puffins from 4 berries, not the 16 like before. Oh, and you cook Puffins with the analog stick in this game if you were curious. There's no touchscreen, even if you pull the switch out of the dock. It would also appear that the gas stove has been replaced with an induction stove, so you have to look at the lights around the base of the pot to tell what phase you're in. Let's talk about the actual most significant change. Puffin making can now be done in Amity Square, and this is the replacement for the multiplayer bonus that reduces the smoothness of Puffins. Before we can get into that though, we have to talk about Amity Square eligibility. It's not too complicated, but it's a strange thing. Then we'll circle back and you'll see how it ties in. Introduced in Diamond and Pearl, Amity Square is a park with basically one purpose: It lets you walk around with your Pokemon, similarly to the mechanic in Pokemon Yellow. There are items to get here, NPCs to chat with, and your Pokemon pick up accessories and berries. Accessories are used in Super Contests, and were basically brought back entirely in Gen 5 in the form of the musical props. We're not going to break down Amity Square right now. What's important to note is that you're only allowed to bring certain Pokemon in to walk with you. Because this was basically them tiptoeing into a huge system like this, they only made a few sprites, and it seems to have been largely based on Pokemon that already had overworld sprites. For example, there are Psyduck blocking Route 210, and the Valley Windworks has a Drifloon that will show up, and both Psyduck and Drifloon are allowed in the park. Here's the full list for the start of Diamond and Pearl. Just 7 Pokemon are allowed in. After getting the National Dex, you get an extra 4. I'm not entirely sure why they do this, it seems a little pointless, but okay. In Platinum, they added the starter families, and in BDSP, they added Eevee's family. There's no Sylveon in this game. Yes, I know the affection system is all over this game. There's no Sylveon. The Amity Square eligibility is explained in-universe as, you're only allowed to bring cute Pokemon, which is an awful explanation, honestly, but they need something to smokescreen the fact that there are simply so many sprites they can make for this little side area. And they'd repay us by expanding to the entire dex for the entire game in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. But we're talking about BDSP now, and truth be told, there really shouldn't be an eligibility issue anymore. Hell, originally the items you could pick up were based on which species you had, but accessories aren't even in the game anymore, so now every Pokemon just picks from a general list of berries and stickers. On top of that, every Pokemon in the game now has animations and a 3D model, as evidenced by the fact that visiting Amity Square unlocks the ability to walk with any Pokemon anywhere in the game. It's really unfortunate that what started as a preview for an exciting new feature with expanding freedom and detail has now become a rather backwards and limiting area. The one positive change that BDSP brings to Amity Square is that now you're allowed to bring out all of your eligible Pokemon at once, giving it at least one benefit. But now that you've got this list that has absolutely no logic both in or out of universe and is essentially just an arbitrary list of Pokemon, we can talk about what this has to do with Poffins. At the north end of the park is a Poffin pot sitting out there for public use, and you're allowed to bring all of your partners to watch. Since we're limited by that arbitrary list, only those Pokemon on said list can come watch Poffins being made. What the game uses here is the friendship values of those Pokemon, and if you've got 6 viewers here, all with max friendship, you can reduce smoothness by 9 points. You're losing a point over the original game, sadly, but in return, this is at least 100% consistent. There's an issue here, though. I would love to give you more specifics, but what I just told you is exactly what's written on Bulbapedia. There is no deeper dive on this page. Cerebi doesn't mention this number at all, but then again, Cerebi's page doesn't really mention much of anything. Not a roast on Cerebi, mind. But what the hell is this, though? Damn near had to rewrite the whole video thinking this was true. It isn't, for the record. There's this post on r/Pokemon Ribbons by Sadistic Mystic 1 that has a lovely breakdown for maxing out contest stats in this game. But of course, the concern here is also just for the max bonus. So I decided to test this myself. Let's do some science. First, a hypothesis. My assumption is that the game is just totaling the friendship values. The max friendship in this game is 255, and a party of 6 Pokemon would have a combined maximum of 1,530 points. This number happens to divide perfectly by 9. Ignore the fact that it also divides perfectly by 10, and they could have just kept the 10-point bonus. 1530 divided by 9 is 170, so maybe you get 1 point of smoothness off for every 170 points of friendship in the pool here. Some added math that makes this extra appealing is that 170 is 2/3 of 255. 170 times 3 is 510, or 2 Pokemon with max happiness. So, if the hypothesis is true, then every max friendship Pokemon would essentially be worth 1.5 points of smoothness, just based on rounding. But of course, we should have seen this coming when we multiplied 255 by 6 and divided by 9 in the first place. I was gonna get a bunch of Psyduck for this because I thought they'd look funny, and then I was gonna do a bunch of Clefairy because they'd be very on brand for me, but ultimately I decided on grabbing an entire team of Torterra, because I like Torterra and I wanted to see how they'd cram 6 of them on the screen. Then I needed to pick a berry. I decided to go with the Rosalie berry, because it's the one new berry that this game has over Platinum. Hey, what about the Key and Moringa berries added in X and Y? They're not real. They didn't put them in. I'm gonna be 100% with you, I wouldn't have been surprised if they left out Rosalie too, despite the fairy type being in this game. Either way, Rosalie's got a smoothness of 35, so we'll first make a Rosalie Poffin in Hearthome as a control to confirm what we get with no Amity Square bonuses. Also mainly because I want to make sure that Rosalie does indeed have 35 smoothness before I start trying to do tests. And sure enough, we get ourselves a sweet bitter Poffin with 34 smoothness. Now to head to Amity Square and start making Poffins with Pokemon of varying levels of friendship. We're gonna bust out some hacking tools to do this with perfect accuracy. By which I mean PK hacks. I need 12 Torterra, 6 of them with 170 friendship, and 6 of them with 255, so I can increase by 170 points evenly and test out all 9 points. I'll also grab a Vaporeon with 0 happiness, because they don't even let you into the park without someone to stroll with. The results were unexpected, to say the least. I can start right away by saying it was very fun, given that the Poffin results screen does not list the smoothness, unlike Pokéblocks, and you can't open the bag in BDSP Amity Square, so I have to leave the park every time I make a Poffin, and when you leave, you have to wait for your Pokemon to walk back on screen, and let me just say, I waited for a lot of Torterra. On the bright side though, there was one point where I accidentally said yes when they asked if I wanted to keep making Poffins, and in Gen 3, if you say yes, you are honor-bound to make another Pokéblock. You cannot back out of the menu. You must use a berry or, well, cut the game off. Fortunately, that's not the case in this game. If you accidentally say yes, I want to make another Poffin, you can just back out of the menu. Anyway, I made a Poffin with Vaporeon here, and, as expected, there was no bonus reduction. Then I went and made a Poffin with my first 170 happiness Torterra, and there was still no reduction. I went back with a max happiness Torterra, and there was a reduction of 1 point. I changed up the strat from here. I went and picked up a full group of 6 Torterra to test, and, well, first, my game did this. And then secondly, I only got 5 of the Torterra to gather around. That was fine, though, since I wanted to see the reduction there anyway. And I got 7 points. At this point, I was concerned whether or not you really did get a full 9-point bonus. So I came back with 6 Torterra, and was pleased to see that the resulting Poffin was indeed 25 smoothness. So I thought to myself, okay, what if it isn't 1 point off for every 170 friendship, and is instead a table like this, where the first point doesn't come off until you hit 171 happiness? So I changed one of my Torterra to 171 happiness, went to make a Poffin feeling quite confident, and it came back with 34 smoothness. No reduction. So it's not that. I tried a few other thresholds with this 171 happiness Torterra, who would wind up becoming a 172 happiness Torterra while I was running around. Every single time, that Torterra wound up not making a difference. Even with this party of 1447 friendship combined, which is over 8.5 when divided by 170, it still only had a reduction of 7 points. So, okay, new hypothesis. What if only Pokemon with max happiness are counted? Or, alternatively, what if it's only multiples of 255? So, I grabbed Vaporeon and set her to 254 friendship. I wanted Vaporeon because she can actually keep up with me, and I didn't want to risk rolling over to 255 friendship on the way to the Puffin machine with all the extra steps that Torterra was going to make me take. I then proceeded to splash all over her face with the worst Puffin ever made. But hey, minigame results only impact the flavors, so that's fine. I hope, at least. I came back and checked the Puffin case and saw 34 smoothness. Again, no reduction. I wanted to cut the research here and just go with this assumption, since a definitive say at this point would require basically checking every single point of friendship from 255 onwards. Or, better yet, what if I tried out a team of 6 Pokemon that all had 254 friendship? Oh god, I ran around a lot, and when I checked my save afterwards, they all had 255. Okay, new plan. A team of 6 Pokemon that each have 253 friendship? I did that, and I got a smoothness of 28? A reduction of 6 points? I got 7 points when I had a team of 5 with 255 each. I got less points with more happiness. I was expecting either 7 points if it was multiples of 255, or 0 points if it was only Pokemon with max friendship. But 6? I checked my save afterwards, and they all still had 253 in friendship. This changed everything. I decided to make one of the Vaporeon 255 friendship, and it was still 28. The other 5 all rolled over to 254 happiness in this time, too. Was it proportional? I don't think it could be that. But 5 Torterra at 255 each got a reduction of 7 points, and 6 Vaporeon at 253 only got 6 points. I tried this breakdown with 2 of them at max friendship, and that one was 27 points. I'd lost it at this point. I didn't have any more working hypotheses. Maybe I'm missing something, but it was here that I spent an entire day trying to metaphorically break the door down on the game and get it to tell me what the hell it was doing. But the truth is that, well, I'm just not knowledgeable enough for this sort of thing. I've never done anything like it, but I go to a lot of lengths for projects like these. As far as I got, I can tell you now that there's this script right here in the game. Puffin Nakayoshi score Hosei. Nakayoshi means close friend or good friend, and Hosei means compensation or manipulation. So, just going by the title, it's a script that makes a change to Puffins based on friendship. And in it, all I know is that there are variables for close friend rank, the score manipulation, and this interesting third one right here, called the teamwork score. Well, if anyone wants to finish what I've started, please do be my guest. I know there's a decomp project for BDSP out there, like literally within the last couple of months. Well, okay, by their own admission, they're not really a true decomp anymore, but the spirit of it remains. In the meantime, I'm afraid I'll have to leave this inconclusive for now. No, actually, you know what? I will give you a conclusion. Just feed them an Oras and transfer them to BDSP if you must. I know, easier said than done, but that's my whole MO. Oh hell, I promised I was going to talk about multiple Pokéblock adjacents. Okay, here's a good one for you. Y'all ever play Berry Crush? Introduced in Fire Red and Leaf Green, I imagine I'm not the only one who had this experience. You get to Cerulean City, you talk to some NPCs, and find a guy who wants berry powder and hands you a powder jar for it, and the immediate reaction is this like Pokéblocks? Only to wind up, well, never playing it because it's multiplayer exclusive, and it's just not enticing enough. For starters, berries are a bit of a pain to get in Fire Red and Leaf Green, so I've never felt like I wanted to use them for this. Secondly, whenever I did get the opportunity for multiplayer, I was mostly just trying to evolve all my trade Evo Pokemon. So let's talk about this. If you've got at least 1 and up to 4 other friends, you all can go to the Wireless Club Direct Corner and play Berry Crush. Yes, 4 others. Some of you may not recall that Fire Red and Leaf Green launched with the GBA wireless adapter, meaning that the prior 4-player limit of the link cable has been bumped up now. You offer up a berry, and mash the hell out of the A button. Once the lid has completely crushed the berries, the minigame ends, and you get some units of berry powder. This one, fortunately, is not very complicated at all, and we can break it down very quickly once I tell you that there are 3 variables of note, 2 of which are, once again, berry stats. First is the berry's base powder stat, second is the berry's difficulty stat, and last is the silkiness, a parameter from the minigame results. Base powder is simply a number innate to each berry, and will be used in the powder calculations that we'll get to after this section. I'll throw up a table of every berry and their base stat. The difficulty stat refers to how many times the A button is expected to be pressed for that berry. Wait a second, where are the e-reader berry stats, I hear you ask? Those are... not real. E-Reader berries are only in Ruby and Sapphire, and Berry Crush is only in Fire Red, Leaf Green, and Emerald. I can tell you the Enigma berry stats at least. When the minigame is conducted, the game adds up all the difficulty stats for the berries, and then it, quite graciously, just tells you how many times the A button was pressed, and then it adds up all the A button presses and gets a percentage. That percentage is the silkiness. Under the hood, what the game is actually doing is, every 30 frames, checking whether or not they should produce big sparkles based on how many A presses there were. This game runs at 60 frames per second, for the record. The silkiness is how many times that check succeeded out of how many times it was called, but it should be roughly equal to the percentage I mentioned earlier. Finally, the game adds up all the berry powder base stats and multiplies that by the number of players, leading to an exponential increase in powder as you add players. After all, if 2 of you are using Pomeg berries, that's 100 times 2, because they add up the base powders, times 2 again because that's the number of players. So with 2 players, that would be 400 units, but if 5 of you use Pomeg berries, that's 100 times 5 times 5, or 2,500 units. This makes the Berry Crush curve kind of monstrous, as 2-player games are almost pointless compared to 5-player games. The formula can be simplified if all players are using the same berry, or rather, berries from the same group, because there is nothing differentiating berries in this minigame outside of their base powder and difficulty stats. In that case, it would be base powder times the number of players squared. Lastly, this number only represents the maximum amount of powder you can expect to get. The percentage of this powder that you earn is the silkiness. The whole formula is the shockingly simple total base powder times number of players times silkiness. It should be noted that silkiness always displays as an integer on the results screen, but the actual percentage generated by the game is what's used for calculation. Remember that the game isn't exactly one-to-one with the calculation mentioned earlier, so if you're sitting on the results screen doing the math on the spot, your result might be a unit or so off. We would be done here if it weren't for one very silly reason. Well, 3 silly reasons actually. You know how I love talking about the arbitrary numbers that these games love to throw at you on the results screens? Well, the devs apparently knew I'd be coming along because this minigame literally throws arbitrary numbers at you, at random. At the end of every Berry Crush minigame, there are 3 pages of results. The first one tells you how many button presses were received from everyone, and the third one is the final page that wraps up the main stats before you're told how many units of berry powder you received. The second page, however, is randomly chosen between 3 possible statistics. The first is the neatness ranking. While mashing A, the game takes notes of periods of time where your mashing was done in perfect intervals. Let's say there was a second where you pressed the button 10 times, but each time you were exactly 6 frames apart. That makes a streak, and if that was your longest streak, then they take the amount of time that streak took as a percentage out of all of your inputs for the entire minigame. In a simplified look, if the minigame took 10 seconds and you mashed that entire time, and your 1 second of perfect 6-frame presses was the longest streak, then you'll get a neatness ranking of 10%. Second up is the power ranking. This one's both really simple and a little weird. It just calculates how much of the time you spent pressing A. I'm afraid I have questions of my own here that I don't quite have the answer to. Namely, how exactly the game determines what time spent pressing A actually means. It can't be the number of frames A was pressed, because pressing A for every frame means you've just been holding the A button. Judging by my numbers here, I assume that it really is number of frames, thus making 50% the highest score you could achieve if you spent the entire time pressing A every other frame. I'm not sure if using L equals A would let you overcome this limitation, because the game might just treat an L equals A input as the exact same thing as a regular A input. Unfortunately, I couldn't find an answer for these questions. Regardless, this one is also a percentage. And lastly is the cooperative ranking. This one's got a fun aspect to it. Whenever you press the button, you'll usually see this sprite appear over the crusher. If you and another player press the button on the same frame, however, you'll get this big smack sprite. If you get the cooperative ranking page, the game will take the percentage of how many of your total A button presses were synced hits. Now, yes, even though you do get a fancy new sprite whenever you do this, none of these bonus results pages have anything to do with the powder calculation at the end of the minigame. They're just for flavor. Shoutouts to Guybrush20x6 on the Bulbapedia talk page for the Berry Crush minigame, who's been waiting for 12 years to hear this answer. And so, with all that said, I will now finally divulge to you what berry powder even is. It's a currency, so you can buy, and I'm just gonna grab Bulbapedia's table here, this stuff. That's it. That's all berry powder is for. They really get you on that curve. If you've got 5 players with nothing but Landsat or Starf berries, you can hit the incredible max of 18,750 units of berry powder, and be swimming in PP ups, the one renewable source of these things, outside of the pickup ability and the Lily Cove Lottery Corner. Whereas if you've just got a couple of players with Rost berries, then you're only hitting a max potential of just 80 units. At the very least, this is the one and only source of herbal medicine within Fire Red and Leaf Green. It's up to you what that's worth. Hey, so you know how the Revival Herb is a max revive in return for the friendship drop that it gives you? Did you know that this effect is absent in Ruby and Sapphire, and those are the only games where that effect is absent? When the Revival Herb was introduced in Gold and Silver, it had the max revive effect, and that's still present in Fire Red, Leaf Green, and Emerald. But in Ruby and Sapphire specifically, it just functions as a normal revive. I always thought the max revive bonus was added in Emerald or in Gen 4 or something, but nope, it's just Ruby and Sapphire being weird. Well, we've talked about the Pokéblock adjacents for Fire Red and Leaf Green and for Gen 4. The next candidate down the list would be Black and White in Gen 5. I imagine at this point your mind is wandering to, what could be in Gen 5? I don't think Gen 5 has one, after all. It replaced contests with musicals, which don't have stats and therefore don't have any kind of Pokéblock replacement. There's no other thing you make with berries. Hell, you can't even grow berries in this game. And that's where you're wrong, except I can't actually talk about any of it. And that's because, well, it's all in the Pokemon Dream World. The Dream World possessed the one and only place to grow berries in Gen 5, and it possesses the one and only thing that involves berry stats, a minigame called Ice Cream Scoop. One day we will go over this one, and it's all thanks to the efforts of the Dream World Revival on Project Pokemon. That project needs the help of as many people as possible, so if you've ever played the Dream World, or are just interested in the project, go check out the page linked in the description. For now, we'll just have to set our sights for the next generation, because yet again, I found something that took me by surprise and really exceeded the scope of the video. And just like last time, I resolved to save it for the next time. Well, if you're interested, stick around. Y'all MFs know how YouTube works, you know what to do. Next time is Pokemon and me and the Pokepuffs. I'll see you then.